and I was a okay student, but not a very diligent student. So I applied to several schools, Ithaca, Syracuse, Boston University, all the big communication schools, and they all said, you can come here, but you need to go into liberal arts and then work your way into the communication studies. Emerson basically at that point asked, can your parents afford to send us a check? And so I was in. So I came to Emerson, and talking to a few of you, Emerson has come quite a long way in the last 30 years. It's certainly one of the most renowned and respected communication schools in the country. When I was here, it was, in the same way, I think it's the same way all of you probably notice around your peers, that there's something sort of unique about all of you, and you're here for a reason, and you know what you want to do. There are not a lot of kids who are like, well, I'll just go to Emerson and see where I want to go. Most of the kids, again, correct me if I'm wrong, when you come here as a freshman, you pretty much know what you want to do, and that hasn't changed. So when I got here, and when most of my peers and the kids around me, for the most part, we knew what we wanted to do. And I was telling somebody here, but academically, and the reputation of the school, it always had a good reputation as far as arts and if you knew what you wanted to do. But as far as academically and sort of accreditation and core curriculum, it was a little shaky. When I first got here as a freshman, the president was relieved of his duties shortly after I got here because supposedly he had called up the trustees and invited them over for a dinner party to share with his friends from his extraterrestrial friends. And I'm not making that up. He was late in his tenure, but he was dismissed shortly thereafter. His name was Gus Turbeville. And he actually lived on top of, well, back then the dorms were on 100 Beacon Street, and he used to occupy the 10th floor. And he was a cartoonist, actually, a very good cartoonist. So it all fell into place. And so it was a sort of a freewheeling atmosphere, but again, much like 30 years later, I have the feeling like everybody knew for the most part what they wanted to do. They were sort of driven. My wife still, I think we had to take one math or science class in 4 years. And I think also, from what I understood, a couple of years prior, Emerson was almost close to losing its accreditation because academically nobody was sort of keeping up with what needed to be done from a core curriculum. So it was teetering on, becoming a trade school. And my wife, who got her master's and PhD at UCLA, still sort of tries to take shots at me and refer to this as a trade school, but I don't let her get away with that. So one of the things I did here was I also played basketball. And that was something that was very enjoyable. It's before it was Division III. We used to have great rivalries with Mass College of Pharmacy and Hellenic and places you probably don't even know exist. But it was very spirited, and some of the best memories I had here, again, based on the people and sort of the experiences. So I finally graduated in 1981, and then it was time to get a job. And actually, in 1980, I went out to Los Angeles. My RA had gotten a job with something called CNN, Cable News Network, and they were about to flip the switch in June of 1980. So he was a year older than me, and he had gotten a job producing the entertainment show in Los Angeles. So me and a friend went out to intern for him. I think one of his kids goes here, Herzog. So me and Doug went to visit Eddie and stay with him, Eddie Madison. And I went there, and I was going to just help out with the entertainment news. And this was between junior and senior year. And, it was Los Angeles. I'd never really been there. And it was Hollywood, and it was all the entertainment and this and that. And I really didn't like entertainment. I had no interest in it at all. And it lasted about a day. They sent me on a couple of shoots, and I was like, I can't do this. And there was a woman who was doing sports, and I just walked up to her and I said, do you have any help? And she's like, no. And I go, well, I'd like to help you. And so I fell into sports, and for 3 months I helped her out. and learned quite a bit because it was hands-on. So then I went back to Emerson. I graduated. My father, who knew nothing about sports, had a little publishing company where he would take basically transparencies from photographs, and he would have hundreds of thousands in files in New York City and sell the international rights to them. So he would travel the world and sell them to like book covers. Back then, if like a place was doing a magazine article, they wouldn't send out photographers. They would buy stock photos. Like if there was a story about Afghanistan, they wouldn't send a photographer. They would call him and say, "You got any photos of Afghanistan?" And so that's how he made a living. So for fear of me never getting a job, he took me to learn his business, and I literally graduated the next day. I was on a plane with him to Europe to be introduced to his clients, again, for fear. He thought this was all a joke. Like, he figured, like, I'll let the kid have fun for 4 years and make animation movies and videos, and, then it's time to get a job and have a real career. So I went with him, and I came back, and I stayed in touch with the people at CNN, and fortunately, I got a job down in Atlanta shortly after I returned from Europe. And so by then, CNN was about a year and a half old already, and it was doing pretty well. So I went down to Atlanta with a classmate from Emerson, and we drove down to Atlanta, and minimum wage was $3.50, and I thought I was pretty big shot because I was making $3.75 an hour. And so, I think it comes out to about $187.50 a week. But in Atlanta at that time, we actually had money in our pocket. So we were doing pretty well. So I stayed there for about a year, and then they started expanding, and they put a sports person in New York and in Los Angeles, and I volunteered to go to New York, and they said somebody else has New York. So I said, well, I'll try Los Angeles. So I went out there, and I basically spent from 1983 to 1995 working in the CNN Los Angeles bureau, and it got to a point where there were about 100 people in there, and only 2 of us were sports. So it was predominantly a news bureau. So there wasn't even a sports bureau in Chicago at that point. So it was really New York and LA. So we covered everything really west of the Mississippi. And, as a younger person starting out, it was fairly phenomenal because I was thrust into covering the biggest sporting events that you can imagine. I don't know how many of you are sports historians, but there was quite a bit going on, especially in California and in the West Coast at that time. So, it was just a 2-person band. I did some reporting myself. So it was a producer and a reporter. We covered everything. At that point, the Lakers were dominant. The Raiders, 49ers, there was a time where the Raiders and 49ers were actually good. They were winning world championships, and the Dodgers and Angels. So every team you can think of in that region was doing fairly amazing. And then on top of it, because of the proximity, boxing has pretty much died for the most part. But back then, it was pretty big. It was the height of Mike Tyson and the end of Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns. So I spent quite a bit of time in Las Vegas covering fights and covering Tyson. There was always a lot going on with him. I was laughing because in the movie The Hangover, there's the whole thing with the tigers. He actually did have tigers, and so I remember being in his backyard with him, and he was playing with them like they were big dogs, and I was just thinking, like, this is not right. Something is not right here. And I just was standing there. I was like, what if they turn or, fortunately we left after a while. But so we did quite a bit of stuff there, and, by this time I had kind of got into my mid-30s. Now, the downside of all this is, it was in a news bureau, so my schedule was pretty chaotic. It was pretty much at the whim of the bosses in Atlanta, like, wake up on Monday and get a phone call. You need to go to Las Vegas, Colorado, come back, take a day off if you can get it. Then you need to cover the Raiders on the weekend, and on and on and on. So along the way, I picked up a wife and 2 kids,